My buddy Owen and I had just finished our junior year in the cybersecurity program at a small college in Michigan when we came up with what we thought was a brilliant idea for our summer research project. We were both 23, way too confident in our own cleverness, and completely obsessed with studying how criminals operated online. The plan was simple. We would create a fake service on the dark web, something that offered vague problem-solving for people who needed things handled discreetly. We figured we would attract a bunch of scammers trying to scam us, maybe some curious people poking around, and we could document the whole thing for a paper on criminal psychology and online behavior. Owen had the technical skills to set up the hidden service, and I handled the writing, creating this mysterious persona that promised results without ever specifying what kind of results. We thought we were so smart, two kids playing pretend in a world we did not actually understand. We launched the site on a Saturday morning in June 2023, sitting in Owen's cramped apartment with the blinds closed and energy drinks scattered everywhere. The interface was deliberately minimal, just a black background with white text, a contact form, and a Bitcoin wallet address. We called it the Fixer because it sounded generic enough to attract attention without being too specific. For the first 3 days, nothing happened. We got a couple of spam messages, one guy asking if we sold drugs, and someone who just typed random letters into the form. Owen and I joked about how anticlimactic the whole thing was, how we had built this elaborate trap and caught nothing but bots and teenagers. We were actually considering shutting it down and pivoting to something else when the first real message came through on Tuesday night. I remember Owen calling me over to his laptop, his voice different than usual, and when I read what was on the screen, neither of us said anything for a long time. The message was detailed in a way that made my throat tighten. Someone with the username NeedHelp99 had written 3 paragraphs about a woman named Jennifer Ashworth who lived on Crescent Drive in a town called Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The message included her daily schedule, what time she left for work, what car she drove, a silver Toyota Camry, and the fact that she lived alone with a small dog. The person writing wanted to know our rates for making her go away permanently, and emphasized that payment would not be an issue. They had already sent $500 worth of Bitcoin to our wallet as a show of good faith, asking us to confirm receipt and provide further instructions. Owen and I just stared at each other. This was not some edgy teenager trying to be scary. This was someone who had done research, who had watched this woman, who had real money to spend. The Bitcoin was already sitting in our wallet, and suddenly our little academic experiment felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. We did not sleep that night. Owen wanted to shut everything down immediately, delete the site, abandon the wallet, pretend none of it ever happened. But I kept thinking about Jennifer Ashworth, this random woman in Pennsylvania who had no idea that someone out there wanted her dead badly enough to pay for it. We looked her up, and she was real. I found her on social media in under 5 minutes. A dental hygienist in her early 40s who posted pictures of her garden and her terrier named Biscotti. She had a sister in Philadelphia and liked to comment on local news articles. This was an actual human being with a life, and someone had just paid us money to end it. The weight of that realization was unlike anything I had ever felt. We were not researchers anymore. We were not clever college kids running an experiment. We were 2 idiots who had stumbled into something genuinely dangerous, and we had no idea what to do next. Owen suggested we just ignore it, let the message sit there unanswered, and maybe the person would give up and move on. But by Wednesday afternoon, 2 more messages had come through, and these were worse. One was from someone asking about a business partner who had allegedly stolen money from them, wanting to know if we could arrange for the guy to have an accident that would look natural. They included the target's home address in suburban Chicago, his gym schedule, and the make and model of his car. The second message was shorter but somehow more disturbing, just a name, an age, 15, and a school address, followed by a question about whether we handled younger problems and how much extra that would cost. I actually had to get up and walk away from the computer after reading that one. I stood in Owen's kitchen with my hands pressed against the counter, trying to breathe normally, trying to process that someone out there was asking us to hurt a child. These were not hypothetical situations or dark fantasies people were typing out for shock value. These were requests with real information, real locations, real people who could be found and verified. By Thursday morning, we had received 11 messages total, and the Bitcoin wallet had grown to almost $3,000 in unsolicited deposits. Owen had not left his apartment in 2 days, and I had barely eaten anything since Tuesday. We kept going back and forth about what to do. Going to the police felt impossible, because we would have to explain that we had created an illegal service on the dark web, even if it was fake, even if we never intended to actually do anything. We could face charges ourselves, expulsion from school, maybe even federal prosecution for soliciting crimes across state lines. But staying silent meant that these people, these real people who wanted real harm done, would just find someone else to do it. Someone who would actually take their money and follow through. I remember sitting on Owen's couch at around 4 a.m, both of us exhausted and terrified, when another notification popped up, another message, another request, another life that someone wanted erased, and all I could think was that we had opened a door we did not know how to close. Owen finally broke down on Friday. He said we had to tell someone, that he could not carry this anymore, that every time he closed his eyes he saw that 15-year-old kid whose name he had memorized without meaning to. We decided to reach out to one of our professors, a guy named Dr. Whitfield who taught network security and had done consulting work for law enforcement in the past. We figured he might know how to handle this without immediately destroying our lives. I sent him an email asking if we could meet urgently about a research situation that got out of hand, and he responded within an hour, saying to come to his office that afternoon. Walking across campus that day felt surreal. Students were throwing frisbees on the quad, laughing about summer plans, complaining about the heat. And there we were, carrying screenshots of murder requests in a folder, about to confess that we had accidentally built a marketplace for violence. I kept looking at people's faces and wondering how many of them had dark thoughts they never acted on, and how many were like the people messaging us, just waiting for the right opportunity. Dr. Whitfield listened to everything without interrupting. We showed him the messages, the wallet balance, the details people had provided about their intended victims. When we finished, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands, and for a long moment he did not say anything. Then he told us something I will never forget. He said that what we had stumbled into was not unusual, that the dark web was full of services exactly like the one we had created, and that law enforcement knew most of them were scams or honeypots. But the people sending those messages did not know that. To them, our fake service was real, and their intentions were real, and the money they sent was real. He said we had 2 options: shut everything down and hope nothing came of it, or work with him to hand the information over to the FBI through proper channels that might protect our identities. He could not promise anything, but he knew people who handled these cases. Owen and I looked at each other, and for the first time in days, I felt like maybe there was a way out of this nightmare. We agreed to let Whitfield make the calls. He told us to keep the site running for now, to not respond to any messages, and to document everything that came in. The FBI would want as much data as possible, and shutting down prematurely could spook the people who had already made contact. That weekend was the longest of my life. I went back to my own apartment, but I could not stop checking my phone, waiting for updates from Owen about new messages. They kept coming. A woman in Texas wanting her ex-husband dealt with before their custody hearing. A guy in Minnesota asking about pricing for surveillance and intimidation of a coworker. Someone offering $10,000 for a clean job on a landlord who was trying to evict them. Each message was a window into a life I never wanted to see, a person who had decided that violence was a reasonable solution to their problems. I started having trouble distinguishing between sleep and waking because the same thoughts cycled through my head constantly. How many of these people would actually go through with something if they found a real service? How many already had? On Monday, Whitfield called us back to his office and introduced us to 2 federal agents who had driven up from Detroit. They were calm and professional, not at all what I expected, and they treated us more like witnesses than criminals. They explained that our situation was not unique, that they had seen college students and amateur hackers stumble into similar traps before. What mattered now was cooperation. They took copies of everything, the messages, the wallet addresses, the server logs that Owen had meticulously kept. One of the agents, a woman with short gray hair whose name I never caught, told us that at least 3 of the requests we received matched ongoing investigations. Real cases with real suspects who had been looking for exactly the kind of service we pretended to offer. She said our data could help build cases against people who might otherwise never face consequences. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I just felt hollow. These were not abstract criminals. These were regular people with jobs and families who had typed out requests to have other human beings killed, and they were everywhere. The agents told us to take down the site that same day, and Owen did it right there in Whitfield's office. I watched him type the commands, watched the server go dark, and felt nothing close to closure. We were told not to discuss the case with anyone, that we might be called as witnesses if any prosecutions moved forward, and that our identities would be protected as much as possible. They thanked us for coming forward and said we had done the right thing, but those words felt empty. We had not done the right thing. We had done a stupid, reckless thing that happened to produce useful information by accident. The agents left. Whitfield told us to take care of ourselves, and Owen and I walked out of that building into the summer heat without saying a word to each other. I remember the sunlight feeling offensive somehow, too bright and too normal for what we had just been through. We parted ways at the edge of campus, and I did not see Owen again for almost 2 weeks. Neither of us knew how to talk about it. That was over a year ago now. I finished my degree, got a job at a small IT firm, and moved to a different state. Owen and I text sometimes, but we never bring up that summer. The FBI contacted me once, about 6 months after everything happened, to let me know that 2 arrests had been made, in connection with information we provided. They did not give me details, just said that our cooperation had helped. I should feel good about that, I guess, but mostly I just feel different. I look at people differently now. The guy behind me in line at the grocery store, the woman walking her dog past my apartment, the coworker who complains about his divorce every day at lunch. I wonder which of them has thought about crossing a line they can never come back from. I wonder how many people out there right now are typing messages into dark corners of the internet, looking for someone to solve their problems permanently. We ran that site for less than a week, and we received over 30 requests. 30 people willing to pay money to have someone hurt or killed, and that was just our tiny fake operation in one small corner of the web. I do not sleep well anymore. I probably never will again. Friday nights alone used to feel like a luxury. Ben, my husband, was away at a work conference until Sunday, and I had the whole house to myself at the end of Oakdale Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac in a small Michigan town where the most exciting thing that happens is someone getting a new mailbox. I had finished my shows, scrolled through every app on my phone, and was on my second glass of Cabernet when I remembered something my coworker Stephanie mentioned during lunch that week. Her brother had apparently been exploring the deep web and found some disturbing forums there. She made it sound like this forbidden corner of the internet that regular people never see. I got my laptop, started searching for tutorials, and after about an hour I managed to download a Tor browser and figure out how it worked. Most of the links I clicked were garbage, broken pages, stuff in languages I could not read. But then I found this one forum that loaded perfectly, and I wished to God it had been broken too. The forum looked ancient, like something from the early 2000s, with a dark background and plain white text. No fancy graphics, no logos, just threads and usernames that were random strings of numbers and letters. I scrolled through the main page and my curiosity turned into something else entirely. There were threads about things I do not even want to type out. Discussions about surveillance techniques on specific people, complete with photos that were clearly taken without consent. Guides on how to find personal information from social media profiles. One thread had a list of home addresses matched with daily routines of the people who lived there. I felt sick, but I kept scrolling, the way you cannot look away from a car accident. I spent maybe 15 or 20 minutes reading before I finally closed the browser, deleted it from my computer, and tried to convince myself that what I had just seen was probably fake, some kind of elaborate dark joke by edgy teenagers. I poured another glass of wine and told myself I was being paranoid. It could not have been more than 10 minutes after I closed everything. I was in the kitchen rinsing my wine glass when my phone buzzed on the counter. I figured it was Ben checking in or maybe Stephanie sending some meme, so I picked it up without thinking. The message came from a number I did not recognize, no name attached, just a string of digits with an area code I had never seen before. There was no text, just a photo. I tapped on it and my whole body went cold. It was the front of my house. My house. Taken from the street maybe 20 feet from the curb, showing the porch light on and my car in the driveway. The angle was slightly tilted, like someone had snapped it quickly while walking by. I stood there staring at my phone for what felt like a full minute, trying to come up with some logical explanation. Maybe it was a wrong number, some weird coincidence, a realtor sending photos to the wrong contact. But then the second message came through. 3 lights on inside. Kitchen, living room, upstairs bathroom. That was all it said. I read it twice because my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I looked up from my phone and realized the message was accurate. The kitchen light above my head was on. The living room lamp behind me was on. And I had left the bathroom light on upstairs when I came down earlier. Whoever sent this was not guessing. They were watching my house right now, at this exact moment, counting which windows were lit up from the outside. I felt my legs go weak and I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. I wanted to run to the windows and look outside, but something told me that was exactly what they wanted me to do. I wanted to see who was out there, but I also did not want them to see me seeing them. I just stood there in my kitchen, frozen between the urge to look and the fear of what I might find. I grabbed my phone and tried to call Ben. My fingers were trembling so badly that I mistyped his number twice before finally getting it right. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then went to voicemail. I hung up and tried again. Same thing. I sent him a text that probably made no sense, something like, "Call me now, someone outside the house, please call me." Then I tried 911. I dialed the numbers and pressed call, and the screen showed it was connecting, but nothing happened. No ring, no operator, nothing. I pulled the phone away from my face and saw that I had full signal, 4 bars. Everything looked normal. I tried again, and this time it rang once before cutting out completely. I do not know if it was the phone, the network, or something else entirely, but in that moment I felt more alone than I have ever felt in my life. I was standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, and I could not reach a single person who could help me. That is when I heard it. A soft rattling sound coming from the front of the house. It was subtle at first, almost like the wind pushing against the door, but then it got more deliberate. Someone was testing the handle. Not knocking, not ringing the bell, just slowly turning the knob back and forth to see if it would open. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped for a few seconds, then started again. Turn, pause, turn, pause. Like they were being patient about it, checking if anyone would react. I backed away from the kitchen toward the hallway, trying to remember if I'd locked the door when I came home. I always lock the door. I always do. But in that moment, I could not remember, and the doubt was enough to make my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. The rattling stopped again, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. My phone buzzed in my hand and I nearly dropped it. Another message from the same unknown number. This one had no photo, just text. "You should not have visited." I stared at those 5 words and felt something click into place in my brain. The forum, The deep web. Somehow, in those 15 or 20 minutes I spent scrolling through that site, someone had tracked me. I thought I was anonymous, thought the Tor browser was supposed to hide everything, but clearly I was wrong. Maybe I clicked something I should not have. Maybe my computer gave away information I did not know it could give. I do not understand how any of it works. And standing there in my hallway with someone outside my door, I realized how stupid I had been. I was a 31-year-old woman who worked in insurance and barely knew how to update her own phone, and I thought I could just waltz into the darkest corner of the internet without consequences. I made a decision. I was not going to stand there like a sitting duck waiting for whatever was going to happen next. I moved as quietly as I could toward the back of the house, staying low, keeping away from the windows. Our house has a back door that leads out to a small patio, and then the yard, which connects to a strip of woods that separates our neighborhood from the next one over. If I could get outside without being seen, I could run to the Nelsons' house 2 doors down. They were an older couple, retired, and I knew they were home because I had seen their living room light on earlier. I reached the back door and put my hand on the lock. It was a sliding glass door, the kind that makes noise no matter how careful you are. I took a breath and started to slide it open, just an inch at first, then a little more. The cold night air hit my face and I was about to step out when my phone buzzed again. The message was a photo. My back patio, taken from somewhere in the yard, maybe near the tree line, showing the sliding glass door I was standing behind. I could see my own silhouette in the image, backlit by the hallway light, my hand on the door frame. The photo had been taken seconds ago. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then stumbled backward and fell against the kitchen island. They were not just at the front of the house, they were everywhere. Watching the front, watching the back, taking photos and sending them to me like some kind of sick game. I crawled across the kitchen floor until I was in the corner between the refrigerator and the wall, the only spot in the house where no window could see me. I pulled my knees up to my chest and sat there shaking, my phone clutched in both hands. I tried 911 again. This time it connected. A woman's voice answered, calm and professional, asking what my emergency was. I started talking so fast I could barely get the words out. I told her someone was outside my house, that they were sending me photos, that they had been trying the door. She asked for my address and I gave it to her, my voice cracking on every syllable. She told me to stay on the line, that she was dispatching a unit to my location, that officers would be there in approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Sounds like nothing when you say it out loud. But when you are sitting on your kitchen floor with strangers circling your house, 8 minutes feels like 8 hours. I stayed in that corner, pressed against the cold tile, listening to every creak and groan the house made. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking if I could hear anything, if anyone was trying to get in. I told her about the front door, about the rattling. She told me to stay away from the doors and windows, to keep the lights on so the officers could identify the house. I remember thinking that the lights were exactly what had given me away in the first place, but I did not argue. I just sat there and waited, counting the seconds in my head. The police arrived in 7 minutes, not 8. I heard the sirens first, distant and getting closer, and then the flash of red and blue lights through the kitchen window. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the house and 4 officers got out. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher until one of them knocked on the front door and announced himself. I got up on shaky legs and walked to the door, checked through the peephole to make sure it was really a uniform, and opened it. The officer was a tall guy, maybe in his 40s, with a calm face that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. I told him what happened, showed him the messages on my phone, pointed toward the backyard where the last photo had been taken. 2 of the officers went around the side of the house with flashlights, while the other 2 stayed with me. I watched their lights sweep across the yard through the trees along the fence line. After about 10 minutes, they came back. They had not found anyone. No footprints in the soft ground near the tree line. No signs that anyone had been standing there. Nothing. The officer who stayed with me, his name tag said Briggs, told me that whoever had been out there must have left when they heard the sirens. He said these things sometimes happen, that there are people who get a thrill out of scaring others, and that the connection to the forum I visited was probably not a coincidence. He explained that some of those sites have ways of tracking visitors that most people do not know about, scripts that can pull your IP address even through a VPN if you are not careful. He asked if I had clicked on anything, downloaded anything, and I told him I did not think so, but I was not sure. He took down all the information, made copies of the messages and photos from my phone, and told me they would look into it. He also suggested I stay somewhere else for the night, maybe with a friend or family member, just to be safe. I called Ben again, and this time he picked up. I could barely explain what happened without crying. He said he would leave the conference first thing in the morning and drive straight home. I spent that night at the Nelsons' house, sitting in their guest room with the lights on, unable to sleep. Ben got home the next afternoon and we went through the house together, room by room, checking every lock, every window, every corner. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was missing. It was like that night had never happened, except for the photos still saved on my phone and the police report with my name on it. The detective assigned to the case called me twice over the following weeks, but he never had any real updates. The phone number that sent the messages was traced to a burner, purchased with cash somewhere in Chicago, already deactivated by the time they looked into it. The photos had no metadata, no GPS coordinates, nothing that could tell them where they came from or who took them. The forum I visited was gone too. I tried to find it again a few days later, just to show Ben what I had seen, but every link led nowhere. It was like it had been erased from the internet completely. The detective said that was common with those kinds of sites, that they appear and disappear all the time to avoid detection. He told me to let him know if anything else happened, but nothing ever did. That was almost 2 years ago. I still live in the same house, still drive down the same street, still wave at the Nelsons when I see them outside. Ben and I got a security system installed, cameras on every corner of the property, motion sensors, the whole setup. I check the footage sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, scrolling through hours of empty driveway and still trees. I have never seen anything unusual. No figures standing at the edge of the yard. No shadows moving where they should not be. Whoever was out there that night, whatever they wanted, they got it and moved on. Or maybe they are still watching from somewhere I cannot see, waiting for something I do not understand. I do not know which possibility scares me more. What I do know is that I will never visit a site like that again, and I will never forget how it felt to see my own silhouette in a photo I did not take. Some doors, once you open them, you cannot close. You just have to hope that whatever came through decides to leave on its own. At the time this happened, life felt predictable in a way that almost bored me. I was working remotely, renting a small place on the edge of a quiet Midwestern town, and spending most nights scrolling forums instead of talking to people. Curiosity had become a habit, especially anything involving obscure corners of the internet and the strange things people claim to find there. That's how I came across an ad for a dark web mystery box labeled "Authentic Unclaimed Items," written in sloppy text with no branding and no explanation. The price was low enough to feel reckless, but not stupid, which probably says more about my mindset than I'd like to admit. I told myself it was just leftover junk from storage lockers or abandoned mail. Nothing dangerous, nothing real, just something to break the routine and give me a story to read later. I placed the order late at night and closed my laptop, already forgetting about it. For a few days, life went on exactly the same. The package arrived wrapped in plain brown layers with no return address, heavier than I expected. Inside, everything was arranged carefully, almost respectfully, like someone packing memories instead of objects. There was a small spiral notebook with a cracked black cover, the kind sold at gas stations, its pages warped like they'd been near moisture. A cheap prepaid phone sat underneath, powered off with scratches along the screen that formed a faint crescent. At the bottom of the box was a plastic bag tied with a knot so tight I had to cut it open. Inside were clothes, dark jeans and a hoodie, stiff with dried soil and carrying a sour, metallic smell that clung to my fingers. None of it felt random, and that realization crept in slowly. This wasn't clutter. This was a selection. I sat at my kitchen table flipping through the notebook, expecting rambling thoughts or nonsense entries. Instead, most pages were filled with short lines, repeated phrases, and odd notes about locations written in a careful, almost apologetic handwriting. One phrase appeared again and again, underlined each time as if it mattered more than the rest. On impulse, I typed that phrase into a regular search engine, expecting nothing. What came up made the room feel smaller in a way I can't properly explain. The phrase matched a line quoted in a local news article about a woman named Hannah Cole, who had disappeared several years earlier. The article mentioned a notebook found at her apartment with the same wording, described as something she wrote during bouts of anxiety. Photos showed her smiling awkwardly at the camera, wearing clothes disturbingly similar to what sat in my trash bag. I closed the laptop and just sat there, listening to the refrigerator hum like it was the only thing still working properly. Sleep didn't come easily after that, and the following days felt stretched thin, like time was dragging itself forward. I kept the box sealed in a closet, telling myself distance would make it feel less real, but it didn't help. Late one evening, a notification lit up my screen from an encrypted account I didn't recognize. The message was short and polite, thanking me for the purchase and asking if the items met my expectations. Attached was a single photo. It showed the front of my house taken from the street, porch light on, curtains drawn exactly the way I leave them at night. There was no explanation, no threat, just proof that the sender knew where I lived. That was the moment it became clear the box hadn't been a novelty at all. It was a message, and I had just confirmed that it had been delivered to the right person. I didn't reply to the message, but ignoring it didn't bring any relief. Every sound outside started to carry weight, like it was trying to tell me something. Cars passing too slowly, the scrape of wind against the siding, footsteps that might have been mine echoing in the wrong direction. The prepaid phone from the box sat powered off on my counter, and I couldn't stop staring at it, wondering if it would light up on its own. When I finally turned it on, the screen blinked to life without asking for a code. There were no contacts saved, no apps, just one photo in the gallery. It showed a patch of ground freshly disturbed, with the corner of fabric barely visible beneath the dirt. The image metadata had been stripped, leaving no clues except the quiet certainty that it wasn't meant for me to admire. It felt like an invitation I never asked for. That night dragged on in pieces. I tried distracting myself with television, then music, but everything sounded too loud or too empty. At some point, another message came through the same encrypted account, asking again for feedback, phrased almost cheerfully. The casual tone made it worse, like the sender enjoyed pretending this was a normal transaction. I noticed then that the account name matched a phrase written on the inside cover of the notebook, something I hadn't paid attention to before. That detail stuck with me more than the photo had. It suggested planning, patience, and a long awareness of how this would play out. Whoever sent the box hadn't acted on impulse. They had waited for someone like me to bite. I made the decision to involve the authorities the next morning, bringing everything with me in sealed bags. The reaction was measured but tense, the kind of calm that doesn't promise comfort. They recognized Hannah Cole's name immediately and asked questions I struggled to answer, like why I'd ordered the box in the first place and how much I'd interacted with the seller. The notebook and clothing were taken away, and the phone disappeared into an evidence locker. An officer advised me to stay with a friend for a while and keep my routines unpredictable, which sounded surreal coming from someone in uniform. Before I left, another message came through on my phone, unread by them. It simply said, "You weren't the first choice." That sentence followed me out of the building and all the way to the borrowed couch I slept on that night. Weeks passed without another message, and eventually the silence became its own kind of answer. The investigation didn't lead anywhere public, and I stopped checking forums altogether. The part that stays with me isn't the fear anymore, but the realization that someone out there used a missing person's life as leverage, as proof of reach. The box was never about shock value or entertainment. It was a test, a way to see who would look closely enough to understand what they were holding. I still don't know why I was chosen in the end, or what happened to Hannah beyond what's already known. All I know is that curiosity used to feel harmless to me, and now it feels like something that watches back. Eventually, I stopped waiting for another message and focused on doing something practical instead of spiraling. I moved out of that house entirely, not dramatically, just quietly, packing my things over a weekend and leaving no forwarding address tied to my name. I changed numbers, scrubbed old accounts, and abandoned the online spaces where I'd first found the listing. It wasn't about running away so much as removing myself from the path I'd unknowingly stepped onto. The authorities never told me outright to disappear, but their silence said enough. No updates, no reassurance, just the understanding that some doors, once opened, don't close cleanly. I told myself relocation was temporary, a pause until the anxiety eased. Deep down, I knew it was permanent. Months later, a detective contacted me once more, asking if I'd noticed anything unusual after the move. Nothing had arrived, no photos, no messages, no reminders. The seller's account had vanished, along with the listing, as if it had never existed. The case tied to the notebook remained unresolved, officially still open, unofficially stalled. They believed the box had been assembled years earlier and circulated deliberately, passed from seller to seller as a kind of credential, proof of proximity, proof of history, proof that the person behind the screen wasn't bluffing. Hearing that reframed everything. I hadn't been targeted for who I was, but for who I represented. Someone curious enough to open the box and careful enough to understand it. I still think about the moment I clicked buy, how casual it felt, how small the decision seemed. The unsettling part isn't the threat that followed, but the professionalism of it all. No rage, no urgency, just calm confirmation that access existed. Whoever sent that box didn't need to act further. The message had landed. I was aware now, and awareness was the point. Sometimes I imagine that box sitting on another kitchen table somewhere, opened by someone else, starting the same chain of recognition. That thought keeps me grounded in a strange way. It reminds me that survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just knowing when to stop looking. These days, my life looks ordinary again from the outside. New routines, new surroundings, fewer late nights online. I don't chase mysteries anymore, and I don't open doors just because they're there. When people joke about dark web stories or mystery boxes, I stay quiet. There are things that exist solely to confirm they can reach you, not to entertain you. I learned that lesson without anyone knocking on my door or saying my name out loud, and I'm grateful for that. If this story sounds restrained or unfinished, that's because it is. Some experiences don't end with answers. They end with distance, and that's the best outcome I could have hoped for. Most people my age spend their evenings watching television or scrolling through Facebook, but I have always been drawn to the forgotten corners of the internet. I work as a digital archivist for the county library system in Albuquerque, a job that sounds boring until you realize it gives you access to tools and knowledge that most civilians never encounter. My daughter left for college in Arizona back in 2018, the same year my husband started traveling 3 weeks out of every month for his consulting firm, and suddenly, I had more empty hours than I knew what to do with. That was when I taught myself to navigate the deep web. It began as professional curiosity. I was trying to recover old community forums that had disappeared when their servers went offline, preserving digital history that would otherwise be lost forever. I learned how to use Tor, how to read onion addresses, how to trace the ghosts of websites through mirror sites and archive services. My coworkers joked that I was becoming obsessed. They had no idea how right they were. On a Wednesday night in early March, I found something that I cannot stop thinking about even now, months later. I had been following a trail of dead links for hours, starting with an old photography forum from 2004 and bouncing between archive mirrors until I barely remembered where I had begun. That was when the page loaded, a personal blog that looked like it belonged to another era entirely. Plain white background, Times New Roman font, no header images or sidebars or any of the things modern websites have. The URL was a meaningless string of letters and numbers, the kind that gets auto-generated when someone does not bother choosing a real address. What caught my attention was the date on the most recent post, just 3 weeks earlier. Everything about the site screamed early 2000s, yet someone was still updating it. The post was titled, "Lessons from February," and I assumed it would be the usual self-help nonsense or amateur creative writing. I scrolled down and started reading, and within 30 seconds I felt my entire body go rigid in my chair. The writing style was fragmented, almost stream of consciousness, like someone jotting down thoughts without any intention of making them coherent. The first entry talked about mistakes and lessons learned, phrases that seemed innocent enough on their own. But the context was all wrong. The author wrote about someone who did not cooperate and how frustrating that had been, how it had forced a change in plans. There were references to timing, to patience, to the importance of observation. Between the blocks of text, there were photographs, not of people but of objects. A single house key on a wooden table labeled with a date and the words, "Riverside Drive, unsuccessful." A pair of running shoes, white with pink laces, photographed on what looked like a garage floor, labeled November 14th, Cedar Hills Park. A silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a butterfly, resting on a dark surface I could not identify, labeled only with a date from January. I kept scrolling, my mouth dry, telling myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe this was some kind of art project, a fictional horror blog meant to unsettle visitors. People create things like that all the time. But the deeper I went, the harder it became to convince myself this was fiction. The entries spanned almost 2 years, and they followed a pattern that made my skin prickle. The author would write about watching someone, learning their schedule, noting when they left for work and when they came home. Then there would be a gap of a few weeks, followed by a post about what went wrong or what went right. The language was clinical, detached, like someone reviewing their own performance. She was more alert than expected, had to abort. The window was a better access point than the door. Next time I need to account for neighbors who keep irregular hours. And always, there were photographs of objects. Jewelry, keys, shoes, a hairbrush, a coffee mug with a logo I did not recognize. Each one tagged with a date and a location. I found myself breathing faster, my pulse hammering in my temples. I grabbed a notebook from my desk and started writing down every location mentioned, every date, every detail I could extract from those cryptic entries. I needed to prove to myself that this was fake, that none of it matched anything real. It took me less than an hour to find the first match. One of the entries from October mentioned a location called Ridgecrest Avenue, a name I did not recognize, but that sounded local enough to search. I typed it into a regular browser along with the word "missing" and the year, and the results made me push back from my desk so hard my chair nearly tipped over. A woman named Felicity Dunn had disappeared from Ridgecrest Avenue in October of the previous year. She was 26 years old, a veterinary technician, last seen leaving her apartment complex around 7 in the morning. Her car was found parked at a trailhead 15 miles outside of town, but she was never located. The case was still open. I pulled up every news article I could find about her, scanning for details, and then I went back to the blog and read that October entry again. The author mentioned watching someone who walked a small dog every evening, someone who kept her blinds open, someone who drove a dark blue sedan. Felicity Dunn owned a Chihuahua mix named Peanut. She lived in a ground floor unit. Her missing person flyer showed her standing next to a navy blue Mazda. I sat in my chair, unable to move, reading those two sources side by side until the words blurred together. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. Ridgecrest Avenue is not an uncommon street name, and plenty of young women have small dogs and dark sedans. But something in my gut knew better. I went back to the blog and found the photograph attached to that October entry. A single silver stud earring shaped like a tiny star, resting on what looked like concrete. I searched for more images of Felicity Dunn and found an Instagram account her family had kept public as part of the search efforts. In photo after photo, she wore the same small silver stars in her ears. They had been a gift from her grandmother, according to one of the caption. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, trying to process what I had just found. Either I had stumbled onto the personal journal of someone who was fantasizing about crimes he had read about in the news, or I had found something much worse. A record. A trophy case. The private documentation of someone who was actively hunting people in my city and getting away with it. I did not sleep that night. I made coffee at 2 in the morning and sat at my kitchen table with my notebook, going through every entry on the blog and cross-referencing each location and date with local news archives. By sunrise, I had found 3 more potential matches. A woman named Iris Calloway, who vanished from a neighborhood called Sunset Terrace in August. The blog mentioned that same area and described someone who moved too quickly and noticed things she should not have noticed. A college student named Brooke Ellison who disappeared from near the university campus in December. Her backpack found abandoned in an alley behind a coffee shop. The blog had an entry from that same week about a near miss and the difficulty of working in areas with too many witnesses. And most disturbingly, a Jane Doe case from the previous spring. A body discovered in an arroyo on the outskirts of the city, never identified. The blog entry from that period talked about finishing what was started and included a photograph of a thin gold necklace with a broken clasp. Each connection I found made me feel more certain and more terrified. This was not fiction. This was not a game. Someone was documenting their crimes in a hidden corner of the internet, and I had found it by accident. The entry that finally pushed me to action was dated just 6 weeks before I discovered the site. It mentioned a location I recognized immediately, Lomas Boulevard, less than 3 miles from my own house. The author wrote about a new subject, someone they had been watching for several weeks, someone whose patterns were predictable and whose building had poor security. There was a photograph of a keychain, a small leather strap with a brass initial charm, the letter K, and a note about how easy it had been to make a copy while the subject was distracted at a laundromat. I searched for recent missing persons reports from that area and found nothing, which should have been a relief but instead filled me with dread. The blog entry was recent. The author was still watching. Whoever owned that keychain might still be alive, still going about their daily routine, completely unaware that someone had copied their key and was waiting for the right moment. I could not just sit on this information. I could not go back to my normal life and pretend I had never seen any of it, but I also had no idea what to do next, or who would even believe me. I called the Albuquerque Police Department that same morning, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I had found. The woman who answered transferred me twice before I finally reached a detective in the missing persons unit, a man named Sergeant Orozco, who listened patiently while I stumbled through my story. I told him about the blog, about the photographs of personal items, about the locations and dates that matched open cases. I gave him the names: Felicity Dunn, Iris Calloway, Brooke Ellison. I described the entry about Lomas Boulevard and the copied key. When he finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sergeant Orozco asked me how I had found this website, and I explained about my work, about the deep web, about following dead links through archive services. He asked if I had saved any of the content, and my heart sank because I had not. I had been so focused on researching the connections that I never thought to take screenshots or download the pages. He gave me his email address and asked me to send him the URL so their digital forensics team could take a look. I thanked him and hung up, already opening my laptop to retrieve the address from my browser history. The site was gone. I clicked through my history, found the exact link I had followed the night before, and watched it load into nothing but a blank page with an error message. Connection refused. I tried again, cleared my cache, restarted Tor, used a different browser, Nothing worked. The blog had vanished completely, as if it had never existed at all. I sat there staring at the error message, feeling a cold weight settle in my stomach. Whoever ran that site had either taken it down on their own or had some way of knowing when they were being watched. I emailed Sergeant Orozco anyway, sending him the URL and explaining that the page was no longer accessible. I attached my handwritten notes, everything I had documented during my sleepless night, every name and date and location I had connected. His response came 3 hours later. A polite thank you for my concern, a note that the digital forensics team had been unable to locate any content at the address I provided, and a suggestion that I might have encountered a hoax or an elaborate piece of horror fiction designed to seem realistic. He said they would keep my notes on file, but there was nothing actionable without evidence. I read that email 4 times, each time feeling more sick than before. For the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed with finding the site again. I spent every free moment retracing my steps through the deep web, following every dead link I could remember, searching for any fragment of the blog that might have been cached or mirrored somewhere. I found nothing. It was like chasing smoke. Meanwhile, I kept checking the local news, dreading the moment when a new missing person report would appear, when another woman would vanish from Lomas Boulevard or somewhere nearby. I thought about the keychain with the letter K, about the person who owned it, about the copied key sitting in some predator's pocket. I thought about knocking on doors in that neighborhood, warning strangers about a threat I could not prove, but I knew how that would look. A middle-aged woman ranting about a website nobody else had seen, sounding exactly like the kind of person people cross the street to avoid. My husband came home from one of his trips and found me sitting in the dark at 3 in the morning, laptop open, eyes red from exhaustion. He asked me what was wrong and I tried to explain, but the words came out scattered and paranoid. He held my hand and told me I needed to step away from the computer, that I was scaring him. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was losing perspective. But I could not shake the knowledge of what I had seen. The news broke on a Sunday morning in late April. A woman named Kendra Vogel had been reported missing from her apartment on Lomas Boulevard. She was 31 years old, a physical therapist last seen by a coworker on Friday evening. Her door showed no signs of forced entry. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her family said she would never leave without telling someone, that she was not the type to just disappear. I stared at the article on my phone, reading the name over and over again. Kendra, the letter K on the keychain. He had a copy of her key. He had been inside her apartment before she even knew she was in danger. I called Sergeant Orozco immediately and left a voicemail that probably sounded unhinged. I told him about the blog entry, about the keychain, about how I had tried to warn him weeks ago. He called me back that afternoon, and this time his tone was different. He asked me to come to the station and give a formal statement. He asked if I would be willing to work with their digital forensics team to try to reconstruct my search history from that night. He did not apologize for dismissing me before, but I could hear something new in his voice, something that sounded almost like fear. I told him I would be there within the hour. The next 3 months were a blur of interviews, forensic analysis, and waiting. The police tech team managed to recover fragments of my browsing history, enough to confirm that I had accessed something on the deep web that night, though the actual content of the site remained unrecoverable. They cross-referenced my notes with their case files and found details that had never been released to the public. The specific location where Felicity Dunn's earring had been found, the broken clasp on the Jane Doe's necklace, the exact time window when Brooke Ellison had last been seen. I had no way of knowing those things unless I had seen them somewhere, and the only place I could have seen them was that blog. Sergeant Orozco stopped treating me like a nuisance and started treating me like a witness. They brought in FBI consultants who specialized in online predators, people who understood how criminals use the dark web to document and share their activities. One of them, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, told me that what I had stumbled onto was not unique. There were others out there, hiding in plain sight on forgotten corners of the internet. keeping records that no one would ever find unless they got very lucky or very unlucky. She said I was the first credible lead they had found in years. That did not make me feel any better. Kendra Vogel was found in early July, alive, in a storage unit on the edge of the city. A neighbor had reported a strange smell coming from the facility, and when police investigated, they found her dehydrated, malnourished, but breathing. She had been held there for almost 2 months. The man who took her was a 43-year-old electrician named Russell Embry, someone with no prior criminal record, someone who had lived in Albuquerque his entire life without attracting any attention. They caught him because he made a mistake. He used a credit card registered to his real name to pay for the storage unit, a lapse in judgment after years of careful planning. When they searched his house, they found a laptop with an encrypted partition containing hundreds of photographs, journal entries, and detailed notes about women he had watched, approached, and in some cases taken. The blog I had found was just one of several he maintained, rotating between addresses, deleting and recreating them whenever he sensed scrutiny. He had been doing this for over a decade. Felicity Dunn, Iris Calloway, Brooke Ellison. They found evidence connected to all of them. Some of them they found remains. I try not to think about that part too much. Russell Embry is currently awaiting trial on multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and murder. The prosecutors say it will take years to work through all the evidence, to identify every victim, to build cases strong enough to ensure he never sees the outside of a prison again. Kendra Vogel survived, but from what I have heard, she moved out of state and does not speak to anyone about what happened to her during those 2 months. I understand that. Some experiences change you in ways that words cannot capture. I still work at the library, still spend my evenings cataloging old documents and preserving digital history, but I do not explore the deep web anymore. I cannot bring myself to open Tor or follow dead links or wonder what might be hiding just beyond the reach of normal search engines. Sometimes at night, when my husband is asleep and the house is quiet, I think about that blog and the plain white background and the photographs of objects that belong to women who would never come home. I think about how close I came to dismissing it as fiction, how easily I could have clicked away and never thought about it again. I think about the entry for Lomas Boulevard, about the keychain with the letter K, about the weeks I spent trying to warn someone while a woman sat in a storage unit waiting to die. The FBI agent told me I helped save a life, and maybe that is true. But I also know that I found that site by accident, that Russell Embry had been operating for over 10 years before anyone stumbled onto his records, and that there are others out there just like him, patient, careful, invisible, keeping their own journals in the forgotten corners of the internet, waiting for someone to make a mistake. I check my locks 3 times every night now. I installed cameras on every door, and I never, ever leave my blinds open after dark. Boredom can make you do stupid things. At 16, with summer break stretching out like an endless desert and most of my friends away on family vacations, I found myself alone in our house in suburban Milwaukee more often than not. My parents both worked long shifts, Dad at a packaging plant, Mom as a nurse at the county hospital. So from June through August, the house was basically mine from 7 in the morning until 6 at night. I had a decent gaming PC in my room, a graduation gift from my uncle who worked in IT, and way too much unsupervised time on my hands. Most days I would just play online games, watch YouTube videos, or scroll through Reddit until my eyes burned. But that particular summer, around mid-July 2024, I got curious about something I had only heard whispers about in gaming forums and edgy corners of the internet: the deep web. It started innocently enough, or at least that is what I told myself. I downloaded Tor after watching a few videos about internet privacy and how journalists in dangerous countries used it to communicate safely. The first few sites I visited were boring, just forums about cryptocurrency, some libraries of old books, nothing exciting. But then I stumbled into the stranger corners. Not the illegal marketplaces or anything that extreme. I was curious, not suicidal. But forums where people discussed hacking, shared supposedly leaked documents, and posted cryptic threads about corporate surveillance. One forum in particular caught my attention. It was called the Null Archive, and it presented itself as a community of digital privacy advocates. The interface was ugly, all dark backgrounds and green text like something from an old movie about hackers. I created an account with a fake email and a username I thought was clever at the time, ShadowBite16. I lurked for a few days, reading threads, never posting anything. I figured as long as I did not interact, I was safe. I could not have been more wrong. About 3 weeks into my little exploration phase, I got a private message. The notification icon turned red while I was scrolling through a thread about VPN vulnerabilities, and my first thought was that it must be some kind of automated welcome message or spam. The username that sent it was adminnull7, and the message itself was short, almost casual in tone. It just said, "You should be more careful, ShadowBite. Your OPSEC is terrible. Check your downloads folder." I remember staring at those words for a full minute, trying to convince myself it was a prank, some kind of hazing ritual the forum did to new members. But something in my gut told me to actually check. I minimized Tor and opened my downloads folder, and there it was. A text file I had never seen before, dated that same day, named helloshadow.txt. I had not downloaded anything. I had not clicked any links. The file had just appeared on my computer like it had always been there. I wish I could say I was smart enough to shut everything down right then, pull the plug on my PC, and never look back. But curiosity is a powerful drug, especially when you are 16 and think you are invincible. I opened the text file. Inside was a list, and when I started reading it, my whole body went cold in a way I had never experienced before. It was my browser history from the past month, not just from Tor, but from Chrome too. Every single site I had visited laid out in neat chronological order. Below that was a list of the photos saved on my computer, including the file names of pictures I had taken on my phone and transferred over. Then came my school schedule for the upcoming semester, pulled from an email I had received from Roosevelt High 2 weeks earlier. And at the very bottom, in plain text like it was nothing special at all, was my home address. My actual home address, the house where I was sitting alone at that very moment, reading words that a stranger had somehow planted on my computer. I slammed my laptop shut like it was on fire. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it pounding in my ears, and for a long moment I just sat there in my dim bedroom, staring at the closed computer like it might spring open on its own. The house felt different now, bigger and emptier than it had 5 minutes ago. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the air conditioning made me jump. I kept thinking about that address at the bottom of the file, how casually it had been placed there, like a signature at the end of a letter. Whoever this adminnull7 person was, they knew where I lived. They could be anyone, anywhere in the world, but they knew the exact street where I slept every night. I thought about calling my parents, but what would I even say? That I had been poking around illegal hacking forums and now someone was messing with me? I could already picture my dad's face, the disappointment mixed with anger, the lectures that would follow. So I did nothing. I just sat there in the growing dark, too scared to open my computer again, but too ashamed to ask for help. After maybe an hour of sitting paralyzed in my room, I finally worked up the nerve to open the laptop again. There was another message waiting in my Null Archive inbox, sent about 20 minutes after the first one. "Relax," it said. "I am not the one you need to worry about. I am the one warning you. Someone on this forum has been running a data harvesting operation for months. They target new accounts, especially ones with weak security like yours. Your device was compromised the moment you created your account. Keylogger, remote access, the whole package. I am an admin here, and I have seen what happens to people who ignore this. Delete your account, wipe your hard drive, and pray they have not already sold your information. This is not a joke." There was a second file attached to this message, and against every instinct screaming at me to stop, I downloaded it. It was a screenshot of a conversation in some other chat platform I did not recognize, all in a language that looked like Russian. But in the middle of the conversation, highlighted in yellow, was my username, Shadowbite16, followed by a dollar amount, $200. Someone was selling access to my computer, my files, my life, for $200. The next few hours were a blur of panic and frantic Googling. I searched for what to do if your computer has a keylogger, how to tell if someone has remote access to your PC, what happens when your personal information gets sold online. The answers I found only made things worse. Keyloggers could capture every password I had ever typed, my email, my social media, the Amazon account I used to buy video games with a prepaid card. Remote access meant someone could turn on my webcam without the light coming on, could watch me sitting in my room without me ever knowing. And once your data was sold, there was no taking it back. It could be copied, shared, resold 100 times over, passed around like trading cards among people who made their living exploiting strangers. I thought about all the things saved on my computer, family photos from vacations, pictures of my little sister's birthday party last year, screenshots of conversations with friends. Nothing illegal, nothing even embarrassing really, but all of it suddenly felt exposed, violated, like someone had gone through my dresser drawers and touched everything I owned. I unplugged my webcam with trembling fingers and put a piece of electrical tape over the built-in camera on my laptop for good measure. Around 9 that night, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I did not recognize. The message contained nothing but a photo, a picture of my house taken from across the street, the living room windows glowing yellow in the summer darkness. I could see the silhouette of our couch through the curtains, the flickering blue light of the TV my dad must have left on that morning. Below the image was a single line of text. "Nice place. You should really close your blinds at night." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. For a moment I could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stand frozen in the middle of my bedroom with every light suddenly feeling too bright and every shadow too deep. Someone was outside. Someone had been standing across the street from my house taking pictures, and now they wanted me to know it. This was not some faceless hacker on the other side of the world anymore. This was someone close enough to see my living room, someone who knew I was home alone, and wanted me to understand just how vulnerable I really was. I ran through the house closing every blind, locking every door, checking every window twice. My hands would not stop shaking as I pulled the curtains shut in the living room, and I kept imagining eyes watching me from the darkness outside, tracking my movements through the gaps in the fabric. When I finished, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator, knees pulled up to my chest, phone clutched in my sweaty palm. I wanted to call my parents so badly it hurt, but the shame was like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. How could I explain this? How could I tell them that their son had been stupid enough to wander into corners of the internet he had no business visiting, and now someone was stalking him because of it? I thought about calling the police, but what would I even report? Someone took a picture of my house? Someone sent me a text message? I could already hear how ridiculous it would sound, could already see the skeptical look on some officer's face as I tried to explain the deep web and keyloggers, and data harvesting to someone who probably still used their birthday as a password. So I just sat there on the cold tile floor, watching the minutes tick by on the microwave clock, waiting for my parents to come home and trying not to cry. My mom walked through the door around 10:30, and the relief I felt at the sound of her keys in the lock was so overwhelming that I almost broke down right there in the kitchen. But I held it together, told her I was just getting a late snack, tried to make my voice sound normal, even though it felt like my throat was filled with sand. She looked tired from her shift and did not seem to notice anything wrong, just kissed the top of my head and went upstairs to shower. Dad came home about an hour later, and by then I had retreated to my room, lying in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling and jumping at every sound. I did not sleep that night. Every time I started to drift off, my phone would light up with another message from that unknown number, sometimes just a single emoji, a smiley face or a waving hand. Sometimes a few words like, "Still awake?" or "Try to get some rest, big day tomorrow." They knew I was not sleeping. They knew I was lying there in the dark, terrified, and they were enjoying it. By the time the sun started coming up, I'd received 17 messages, and each one felt like a finger poking at an open wound, reminding me that there was nowhere I could hide. The next morning, I made a decision. I was too exhausted and too scared to keep carrying this alone, and the messages had made one thing very clear: whoever was doing this was not going to stop on their own. I waited until my dad was drinking his coffee at the kitchen table, my mom already gone for an early shift, and I sat down across from him and told him everything. I started from the beginning, from the boredom and the Tor browser and the forum with the ugly green text, and I watched his face shift from confusion to concern, to something that looked a lot like fear. When I showed him the text messages, the photo of our house, the file with our address in it, he went pale in a way I had never seen before. He did not yell at me, did not lecture me about being stupid or reckless. He just sat there for a long moment with his jaw tight and his hands wrapped around his coffee mug like he was trying to keep them steady. Then he picked up his phone and called the police. 2 officers came to our house an hour later, and I had to explain the whole thing again. Had to watch them exchange glances when I mentioned the deep web. Had to sit there feeling small and foolish while they took notes and asked questions I did not know how to answer. The investigation that followed lasted almost 3 months. It turned out that the person behind the harassment was not some shadowy international hacker. It was a 19-year-old college dropout named Brendan Lowe, who lived about 40 minutes away in Racine. He had been running a small-scale data harvesting scheme on the Null archive for over a year, targeting teenagers specifically because they were easy marks with poor security habits and parents who might pay to make problems go away. The photo of my house had been taken by someone he paid $20 to on a local gig app, just some random person who thought they were doing a harmless errand. Brendan had never actually been outside my house himself. He was not brave enough for that, but he had built a whole system designed to make his victims feel watched, hunted, completely alone. The police found files on his computer from dozens of kids like me, folders full of personal information he had collected and either sold or used for blackmail. I was lucky, they told me. I came forward before he had a chance to do any real damage with my data. Other kids had not been so fortunate. Some had paid him money to leave them alone. Others had their photos posted on revenge websites. A few had their identities stolen in ways that took years to untangle. Brendan was arrested and eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of computer fraud, identity theft, and cyber stalking. He got 6 years in federal prison, which felt like both too much and not nearly enough. It has been almost a year and a half since all of this happened, and I still think about it more often than I would like to admit. I changed all my passwords, wiped my computer completely, deleted every social media account I had, and started fresh with new emails and new usernames. My parents installed better security software on all our devices and had a long conversation with me about internet safety that I actually listened to this time. But some things you cannot just delete or reset. I still get a jolt of panic whenever my phone buzzes with a text from a number I do not recognize. I still close my blinds before the sun goes down, every single night, even in winter when it gets dark by 5. And sometimes, when I am lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I think about how close I came to having my whole life ruined by a bored college dropout in Racine, who saw me as nothing more than a username and a $sign. The internet is not some separate world that exists apart from real life. It is a door, and once you open it, you cannot always control who walks through. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I am sharing this because maybe someone reading this is sitting alone in their room right now, thinking about exploring some dark corner of the web just to see what is out there. Trust me when I say this. Whatever you think you might find, it is not worth what you might lose.